Welcome back. In the previous video, we created a simple example. We saw that this line of code is creating a divide by zero exception, and therefore we put an except block to handle and assign a default value and print this stuff. In this video, let's dig deeper and try to learn more about the try except block. One of the first things I realized at the end of last video was I created the exception handling basics in a different project. So let me fix that first. So I'll move it to exception handling package and let's say okay. And now we have the exception handling basics in here. And when I run it, what would happen? You know it would print 0 and end because that's what we told it to do. Let's now have a print exception in here. What would happen now? It would say exception, 0 and end. Now, what would happen if the exception did not happen? Let's say I had a value of 1 or 2. What would happen? You can see that exception is not really printed. J is having a value of 5 and end is printed. So that's your first lesson. The important thing is except the code in except block is executed only when there is an exception. If there is no exception in this piece of code, then flow directly goes to the subsequent lines. So after 3, 4, you'd go to 9 and 10. If there is an exception in this piece of code, only then execution goes to line 6 and 7. That's lesson number 1 for this specific step. Now, what we'll do here is we'll create a simple list. List is equal to our favorite example 1, 1, right? So let's call this values. Values is equal to 1, 1, and we would want to do a sum of values. What would happen? It throws an exception. What exception would this throw? We know that already, right? If I take this code and put it in, what exception would this throw? Values is equal to 1, 1 and sum of values. What would it throw? This would throw a type error. It says, I have no idea how to do an addition of an int and a string because when we are trying to add an int and string, I have no idea. That's what Python tells by using a type error. So if you execute this piece of code right now, what do you think will be the output? These lines are not throwing an exception. What would happen? Yep, the same output. What would happen is this line would throw an exception. So execution goes in here, we print exception and j is equal to 0 and print j and print n. You might be thinking, what if I would want to handle these two exceptions differently? I would want to be able to say this one, I'd want to handle and assign a different value to j. And if a divide by 0 exception happens, then I would want to do something different. How do I do that? That's where you can start specifying what kind of exceptions you would want to handle. You can say in except type error. So I only want to handle type errors and I would say print type error. What would this do? What this does is it would only handle type errors. And if a type error happens, it prints type error, assigns a value of 0 to j, and the code continues execution as expected. If a divide by 0 exception happens, what do you think will happen? Aha! What's happening here is the exception is getting thrown out. The exception is not handled, it's getting thrown out. So these two lines of code is not getting executed at all. What is happening in here is a divide by 0, a 0 division error is happening. So this piece of code, line number 4, if you click this, it would take you there. Line number 4 is throwing a 0 division error. And if a 0 division error happens, it is thrown out. But this block says, okay, I only know how to handle type error. I don't know how to handle 0 division error. So it says, don't ask me. I have no idea how to handle it. So basically throws the exception out. There is no exception handling defined. So what happens? The exception gets thrown to the output and the process finishes with a failure. You can see that exit code is 1. What would happen if this is 1? The exit code of the process is 0 because the program ends properly. Even though type error is thrown, we are handling it. Therefore, the process finishes with a exit code of 0. That's a proper exit. However, if I have I is equal to 0, what's happening? This code is throwing an exception, but we don't have an exception block to handle that. What happens? The exception gets thrown to the outside world, and this process finishes with an exit code 1, which is a failure. How can I handle this also? The way I can handle that is by defining another except block. So you can have multiple except blocks. So I can say except, what's the error? You have it here, 0 division error. So if it's a 0 division error, I would want to print 0 division error. And let's say the value of j I would want to assign is 0. Let's say when it's type error, I'll give it a value of 10, and when it's 0 division error, it's given a value of 0. So what would happen now? It prints a value of 0. What would happen if I had a value of 1? This line gets executed, this line gets executed, this line gets executed. But this line would throw a type error. And let's run it. Cool. Now it's saying type error. J has a value of 10 and end. In this step, we looked at two basic things. We saw that if no exception happens, then the code in except is not really executed. So if I change the code right now to say values is equal to 1, 2, then this will not throw a type error, and this will not throw a 0 division error as well. So this code inside the try does not throw an error at all. So what would happen? All this code in here gets skipped. Let's see what would happen. All this code gets skipped. Type error or 0 division error do not get printed, and we go directly to the last lines of code. The second thing which we learned is we can handle specific errors. So if I say except type error, then I would only handle type errors. If I say except 0 division error, then we would be only handling 0 division errors. So you can have specific exception blocks tailored to handle specific exceptions. I'll see you in the next video where we'll talk a lot more about exception handling. Until then, bye-bye.